Imagine a man who lived an ordinary life, a steady job, a wife, a quiet home in the suburbs of Seattle. To his neighbors, he was polite, maybe even boring. But behind that calm exterior was one of the most prolific serial killers in American history. This is the story of Gary Ridgway, the Green River Killer, a man who murdered dozens of women over 2 decades while pretending to be the perfect family man. Gary Leon Ridgway was born on February 18, 1949, in Salt Lake City, Utah. He grew up in a troubled home. His mother was strict and domineering, and his father, a bus driver, often complained about sex workers he saw on his routes. As a child, Gary struggled in school and had a low IQ. He also showed disturbing behavior early on. At one point, he stabbed a 6-year-old boy just to see what it felt like. The boy survived, but the event foreshadowed what was to come. After high school, Ridgway joined the Navy and served in Vietnam. When he returned home, he married, but his marriages never lasted. He cheated often and had an obsession with sex. He spent much of his free time with sex workers around Seattle. By the early 1980s, women began disappearing from the streets of Seattle and Tacoma, mostly young runaways and sex workers. Then, in July 1982, 2 boys riding their bikes near the Green River saw something floating in the water. It was the body of 16-year-old Wendy Lee Caulfield. Soon after, more bodies began to surface. Each woman had been strangled, their bodies dumped along the riverbanks or deep in the woods. Some were posed, some were left naked. The police quickly realized they were dealing with a serial killer. They called him the Green River Killer.
The Green River Task Force was formed. Dozens of detectives, hundreds of leads, thousands of hours of work. But in the early 80s, forensic science was limited. DNA testing didn't exist yet. They relied on fibers, witness accounts, and intuition. The killer seemed to know how to cover his tracks. He dumped bodies in isolated areas and sometimes came back to visit the remains, reliving his crimes. At one point, detectives even consulted Ted Bundy, who was on death row. Bundy suggested the killer might return to the scenes to experience the murders again. That insight, disturbingly, turned out to be true. In 1983, Gary Ridgway appeared on the police radar. He worked at a truck factory, drove a pickup, and often cruised the same areas where victims had vanished. He was interviewed several times. Some survivors described a man who looked like him, middle-aged, brown hair, quiet voice. But Ridgway passed a polygraph test, and without solid evidence, police let him go. For years, Ridgway continued living his double life. He worked full-time at the Kenworth truck plant, attended church regularly, and even volunteered as a religious counselor. He preached to sex workers about repentance and then murdered them. He would later say that killing them gave him a sense of control, that he believed he was cleaning up the streets. Time passed and the bodies continued to appear in forests, along the Green River, near highways. Some victims were found years after they disappeared, others never found at all. By the late 1990s, the case had gone cold. But then, technology caught up. Forensic science had advanced, and DNA analysis became a powerful tool. Detectives reopened the old Green River evidence boxes and sent samples for testing. Semen, hair, fibers, anything that might contain DNA. In 2001, they got a hit. The DNA matched Gary Ridgway. On November 30th, 2001, police arrested him outside the truck factory where he'd worked for nearly 3 decades. The quiet, church-going man from the suburbs was finally unmasked as the Green River Killer. During questioning, Ridgway was calm and polite. He confessed to killing so many women that he couldn't keep count. He described how he'd pick up women, gain their trust, and then strangle them, sometimes during sex. He said he didn't want to pay for sex, and killing them afterward ensured he wouldn't have to. He claimed that murdering them became routine, part of his daily life. To avoid the death penalty, Ridgway made a deal. He would confess to every murder he could remember and lead investigators to the bodies. Over months of interviews, he took detectives to dozens of dump sites, sometimes remembering tiny details like a tree near a body or where he'd parked his truck years earlier. In 1993, Gary Ridgway pled guilty to 48 counts of aggravated first-degree murder, the most murder convictions by a single person in U.S. history at the time. Later, he admitted to at least 71 victims, though the real number may never be known. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus hundreds of extra years for good measure. In court, Ridgway showed almost no emotion. Families of the victims stood up and spoke through tears. They called him a monster, a coward, a void of empathy. One father told him, "Mr. Ridgway, there's a lot of hatred in this room, but I forgive you." That was one of the only times Ridgway cried. He remains imprisoned at the Washington State Penitentiary in Walla Walla, where he lives out his sentence to this day. The Green River murders left deep scars across Washington State and beyond. Many victims' families still don't have closure, and some victims remain unidentified. The case forever changed how law enforcement investigates serial crimes, particularly those targeting vulnerable women. It also showed the incredible power of DNA evidence, which solved what once seemed unsolvable. Gary Ridgway's story is a haunting reminder that evil often hides in plain sight. A man who smiled at his neighbors, went to work every morning, and preached about morality was secretly one of the worst killers in American history. He once said, "I killed so many women, I have a hard time keeping them straight." Those words still echo along the Green River, a chilling reminder that monsters don't always look like monsters. Sometimes they look like the guy next door. If you found this story chilling, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more true crime deep dives. Stay curious, stay safe, and as always, thanks for watching.